So I have this love-hate relationship with cold brew. On one hand, I love cold coffee. I love the idea of it being hot out, having that nice crisp cup of great tasting coffee in my hand. On the other hand, I don't actually love what cold brew does to the taste of the coffees that I like. A typical cold brew 12 to 24 hour immersion tends to round out a lot of the flavors that can really make a coffee stand out and be interesting. And this can actually be favorable for a lot of coffees. It'll kind of sand off the rough edges in a cup of cold brew and come out very chocolatey and sweet. But with certain coffees with a little bit more nuance, a lot of what makes them really good can actually just be lost on cold brew. So if you want to have cold brew, you can end up keeping a bag of less than top tier coffee around just to make your cold brew. And then your good coffee is kind of in this other category and you never really use it for cold brew. And that was more or less true for me until this showed up on my test bench. It's called the Brezi Cold. It comes in at $399 and it was sent to me by the Brezi team. And there's some things that make this brewer really interesting, but we need to place it within kind of the spectrum of cold coffee brewing first. You have that typical cold brew immersion that takes, 12 to 24 hours. A lot of people do it in a fridge, in a jar, or in some cases a bucket. Very sweet, but not very nuanced. Then you have something called Kyoto Cold Drip, and you may have seen this on Instagram, these huge ornate glass towers with this coffee dripping down. That works by percolation rather than immersion, preserves some more of the nuance in nicer coffees. Not at all practical to use at home, and still takes a long time to brew a very small amount of coffee, really. Then you have iced Americanos, which can be good. Whatever you can get out of a shot of espresso, you can translate into an Americano. Iced Americanos, a lot of people would say are better as milk drinks than standalone drinks. And espresso as a method generally tends to lean to the sweeter side than the more acidity forward or floral nuanced side. And then you have flash brew. Flash brew is very interesting, took off in Japan. And what this is essentially you're brewing a hot pour over concentrate over ice. And as you're brewing, that ice melts. And by the time you're all done, it's just all liquid. And your final beverage retains a lot of that spark that can make pour over really great. The issue with that is it's kind of complicated to execute on. The Brezi Cold operates a little bit different than any of those and is actually pretty novel. Now, I get emails all the time from come out of nowhere companies like this with this new brewer that's going to be the best thing to happen to cold brew since, cold brew was invented. And then they show up and basically it's white labeled AliExpress junk. This is not that. As soon as I unboxed it, it was obvious that the build, the quality, and the thought that was put into it, even just as an object and coffee maker, was at another level than some of those products. And then I fired it up, and I was very surprised. Let's brew a cup of coffee with it. The Brezi Cold has a little screen up here that will show you some information, and you actually navigate through the menu using this kind of roller wheel behind the top. It's got arrows on either side here, and when you touch them, the unit actually gives you a little vibration to let you know you touch them. It's pretty cool. And this basket here just pops off. It's magnetic, and it's a pretty simple basket, really. It's kind of structured like other high-flow, flat-bottom drippers. And the Brezi Cold ships with two types of filters, these flat filters, which kind of just sit in the bottom there, or these 155 size wave filters like this. So I've got 16 grams of coffee here, and I'm just going to load that into the filter, just like I would any other cup of pour over. And I'm going to stick it on the bottom here. I'm going to scroll through. I've actually got a custom brew going here, and I'm just going to flip through the menu, indicate that I've loaded it with 16 grams of coffee, and get it to start brewing. Underneath it has this little magnetic drip tray, and it comes with a glass as well. And when it starts brewing, something very interesting happens. The machine actually heats up and runs a hot bloom cycle. Now, blooming is something you do when you're making a pour over, and basically you saturate the coffee grounds for a period of time before you start your main brew process. And what this does is it allows the rest of the extraction to complete more fully by having the coffee degas, get rid of some of that CO2 that was introduced by the roasting process, all of which translates into more nuance and interesting stuff in your final cup of coffee. Then once the bloom is complete, the machine actually cools down using this cooling stuff right in here. There's a fan in here and a little condenser on this side. And it will actually run the rest of the brew cycle at a very low temperature. I've got it running at 5 degrees here. And it will do just kind of this slow drip over the course of about 10 minutes to brew your finished cup of coffee. Now, a standard pour over bloom happens at like 88 to 93 degrees Celsius. You know, some people do them hotter, some people do them colder. Colder blooms have actually become in vogue a little bit recently in pour over world. The Brezi bloom happens at a maximum of 70 degrees Celsius, so quite a bit cooler than a traditional pour over bloom. That gives you some of the benefits of a pour over style bloom, but still coming out, you know, quite sweet when you actually just taste the bloom. The rest of the brew happens just like this. The machine just kind of runs quietly wherever you got it, and it will just keep brewing. You don't have to think about it. And when it's all done, you just grab your cup of coffee and go. So you can kind of operate it like a single serve coffee maker. Now, the founder of Brezi is somebody named Jackson Hung. And I actually had a chance to meet Jackson at World of Coffee in San Diego this year. And as soon as you meet Jackson, it's very obvious that he is super passionate about this product. He has a background actually in semiconductors. So, you know, dealing with, you know, cooling stuff and very technical, all of which is translated into his design of this machine. When it comes to design and manufacturing, the Brezi Cold is Brezi's actually ground up design. You know, they haven't contracted a coffee maker from some other company. Assembly is done in Guangdong, China, in a factory that also produces for several other big names that you would probably recognize. The cooling system inside was developed by Brezi's own thermal engineer. And when it comes to production at the factory, the Brezi team is actually on the ground there during production runs, not just, you know, on spot checks, that kind of thing, really being hands-on throughout the process, which is a good thing when it comes to manufacturing. Now, I asked about SMETA and other types of labor audits, and the team doesn't have that stuff in place at this point, but they did express that those types of certifications are something that they do want to move toward as the company scales, which is another good thing. Now, just while this is brewing, the Cold has 5 modes. You know, it has regular mode, which you can do light, medium, or dark. It has concentrate mode, so it will brew a smaller amount at a higher strength. It has slow drip, so moving closer to that Kyoto slow drip style cup. And then it has tea and custom profiles where you can kind of set each individual parameter for yourself. And that's what I'm running here right now. This coffee is actually a very lightly roasted, high altitude washed geisha coffee. It's something that you would normally keep very far away from anything even closely resembling cold brew. Hard to extract, very floral, very subtle and nuanced coffee, all things that would make for a really difficult, good cold brew style cup that is actually honoring to what the coffee is actually capable of. Couple things I did with the profile to help get the most out of this coffee in particular. Number one, I pushed the temperature of the bloom up to the maximum amount, which is 70 degrees Celsius. I combine that with a higher bloom volume, and those two things working together are going to do a lot more work on the front end of the brewing process to release a lot of the nuance in this coffee. Then for the remainder of the brew, I dropped the temp as low as it would go and extended the ratio slightly, which results in a slightly more aggressive extraction. Now, all that is kind of technical, but the bottom line is once you have your head wrapped around some of this stuff, if that's something you even want to do. I mean, the stock profiles do get a pretty good result, but you can really tune this even like by coffee to get the right result in the cup that is what you are looking for. All right. And we are done. Let's see how this tastes. Okay, that is really good and not at all what I would normally expect out of a cup of cold brew. I'm getting a lot of aroma, a lot of florals, a lot of nuance, still very sweet, nice acidity, very good. You can also serve over ice if you want. That will introduce some dilution, but it can be nice in doses. That coffee is poppin', which is not normally a word I would use to describe cold brew. And, if you don't want to use ice, but you do want to get that temperature like rock bottom as you're drinking it, you could even use like whiskey rocks for this kind of thing. In some ways, it may seem over the top, but I think with the right coffee, it actually is suiting. Bottom line, from my experience on this machine, I did not really have high expectations for it, to be honest. I kind of thought maybe this thing is going to be a flop. I tried it and I was really impressed. The stock profiles produce a pretty good result. If you want to take it further, you can dial it in to get basically whatever result that you want. It's unobtrusive and easy to use. So if you got a busy lifestyle, kids running around, it is the type of thing where once it's configured the way you like, you can kind of walk up to it and very quickly get a cup of coffee going and then come back to it later. And you're going to have a really nice, refreshing cold beverage. It'll run the same program every time, hot bloom, cold drip, and then your hands off. And the result is something that isn't really supposed to exist with traditional immersion cold brewing. That nuance, those florals, all that interesting stuff that you can normally only get at with more complicated brewing styles in a really easy and unobtrusive package. And, if you do want something that has that more thick, round, sweet, you can get there by doing this. You can do a concentrate shot where it will brew you a much stronger concentrated beverage that you can do a milk drink with, for example. There really is a very wide spectrum of outcomes that you can get with this thing, but it does something that I haven't really found in a cold brew maker. And so for me, I feel like this is the year where cold brewing is actually kind of clicking for me. Now, it's cool, it's novel, it works as advertised. As always, there are compromises with any product. Number one, this is a single serve coffee maker, more or less. You can kind of cheat the process by doing a concentrate, splitting it into 2 drinks or whatever, but you are going to be limited to that 16 to 20 grams of ground coffee range. You're not going to be able to brew a big batch of coffee with this. So if you got friends over and they all want cold coffee, it takes 10 minutes to brew, so you're going to be turning over brews. Next up is the price, $399. And I think for what the machine actually is, the Brezi is actually over delivering, in my opinion, at that price. Now, $400 is a lot. So unless you're really into cold coffee and maybe even specifically this type of cold coffee, it may be too much for you to spend on something where you can put coffee in a jar in the fridge and run it through a sieve and you can have cold brew concentrate. I also found that if you really wanted to get the most out of difficult to extract higher end light roasted specialties, it really did benefit from a little bit of extra work beyond the stock profiles. And the user interface, it works. It's kind of cool, actually, but it is a little bit different. I've not seen a roller wheel / semi touchscreen type interface before. You do adjust pretty quickly to it, but it is different. A couple other things, if you're moving the machine around and you have a cup of coffee on here, this drip tray is magnetic, which is actually really nice for cleaning, but it can separate pretty easily if you are moving the thing around. Longevity, I think, is an unknown at this point with this machine. These are relatively new products and we don't really know how they're going to last or perform over the long term. And lastly, the power brick is external and it's pretty large and pretty ugly. So you're going to have to find somewhere to hide that, I guess. It does use those wave filters, but there is some flexibility in terms of which ones you try. And it is compatible with flat filters as well, which you can even cut them and put different filters in the bottom if you want to do that. Overall, I didn't have high expectations for this machine. It was an unknown to me, and I didn't know what to expect. And after using it, brewing it, I feel like this is maybe the first automated cold coffee brewer that doesn't leave something on the field when I'm brewing really nice coffees that I would not typically let near a cold brew setup, is not really leaving something significant out there on the field on one end or the other. It really does a spectrum of things quite nicely, and it is kind of seamless to work into your routine. Now, if cold brew for you is just a vehicle for, milk and sugar and syrups and that kind of thing, you might not need this machine. You could probably get away with putting a mason jar in your fridge and pouring the concentrate out by cheesecloth and then making your iced latte and going on with your day without spending $400. Unless the convenience factor is what gets you there. On the other hand, if you're the type of person that has all these really nice coffees up there in your cupboard and you think, oh, that would be really nice as like a flash brew, but I can't be bothered for that, or Kyoto cold drip or something like that, I'll just brew it hot. That changes the equation a little. And I think that's where this machine, for me especially, becomes pretty attractive. I'm looking forward, as the weather gets warmer and it gets hotter outside, to actually finally having a lot of those really special coffees as ice drinks out on the porch. So at this point, I think I want to hear your take on the Brezi Cold. Are you intrigued by this? Are you one of those people with, a bunch of fancy coffees and you like the idea of enjoying them cold? Or maybe you just like regular cold brew and you just want a automatic solution that you don't have to manage being in the fridge and running through filters and that kind of thing? Or maybe $400 for a cold coffee maker just seems totally absurd to you when you can get cold brew out of a mason jar. Let me know your thoughts down there in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you on the next one.